I never thought one question could change the course of my life. But the day my fiancée met my father, everything I believed about love, trust, and honesty was turned upside down. I remember waking up that morning with a strange mix of excitement and dread, a feeling I didn't fully understand. Amelia had been so kind, so thoughtful, so sure about us, but sometimes even the kindest people hide layers we cannot see. The sun was barely up, spilling a soft golden light across our small apartment. I was nervous in a way that felt almost foreign to me. Not because I was meeting her family, though meeting Samuel, her billionaire father, was intimidating enough, but because I felt the weight of my own insecurities pressing against my chest. I had always lived a simple life, one where money never dictated love or happiness. And yet, here I was, about to sit across from a man whose world could never fully understand mine. Amelia looked radiant, as always. Her smile had a warmth that could quiet my racing thoughts, and her hands, gentle and steady, reassured me more than she could know. She squeezed my hand lightly as we drove to Samuel's mansion, a place so vast and polished it made my apartment feel invisible. I tried to focus on her eyes, their calm confidence, but all I could hear in my mind was the ticking of a clock, counting down to a moment that might define the rest of my life. And then it happened. The moment Samuel entered the room, tall, composed, his eyes sharp and observant. I felt like a small boy, again nervous, unworthy, yet stubbornly hopeful. Amelia greeted him with grace, the kind of grace that comes from knowing exactly who you are. But as Samuel looked at her, his expression shifted, just slightly, a hint of a question lingering in his gaze. And in that instant, I realized whatever he was about to ask could change everything between us. I tried to steady my breathing, to prepare myself, but nothing could prepare me for what came next. One simple question, one answer, and suddenly, my world, our love, and my understanding of Amelia would never be the same again. I still remember how James and I first met. No, I should say Amelia and I first met. I was standing in a tiny bookstore downtown, flipping through a worn copy of my favorite novel, when she appeared like a ray of sunlight breaking through the dull gray morning. She was browsing the same shelf, her fingers lightly brushing over the spines of books, as if each held a secret she longed to uncover. I must have stared a little too long, because she looked up and caught my eyes, smiling in that effortless way that made you feel seen, really seen, for the first time. I don't know why she chose to talk to me. Maybe it was my awkward joke about the book I was holding, or maybe it was just fate. Whatever it was, that day began a slow, beautiful journey, a journey that made me feel alive in ways money never could. Amelia was unlike anyone I had ever known. She carried herself with quiet confidence, but she had a softness too, a genuine curiosity about the world, about people, and about me. We were from completely different worlds, yet somehow our hearts met in the middle. I with my small apartment, my second-hand car, and my humble paycheck, and she with her designer clothes, her expensive coffee, and the way people seemed to open doors for her simply because of her last name. I sometimes wondered if she saw me as a distraction, or if she genuinely cared. But the truth was obvious in her every gesture, in the way she listened when I spoke, in the little notes she left on my desk when I worked late. And then came the moment I never imagined, the day she said she wanted to introduce me to her father, Samuel, the billionaire who built his empire from scratch. A man known in our city not just for his wealth, but for his sharp mind, his commanding presence, and the unspoken rules he expected everyone to follow. I wasn't afraid of him, I was terrified. We arrived at his mansion, a place that seemed to touch the clouds. All polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, so different from the modest world I was used to. Amelia held my hand, a quiet reassurance that we were in this together. Samuel greeted us at the door. He was exactly what I had imagined, all imposing and calm, with eyes that seemed to measure everything in an instant. "James," he said, his voice steady and deep, "Amelia has told me a lot about you." There was a pause, a weight in the air that made me swallow hard. I wanted to speak, to tell him that I loved his daughter more than anything, that money didn't matter to me, but something about the way he looked at me held my words back. Amelia stepped forward, her hand brushing against mine. "Dad, I want you to know him. He's honest, kind, and he makes me happy." Her voice was calm, confident, and yet I could feel the tension behind her words. I knew Samuel was testing me, testing us, and I had no idea how I would pass. The day went on slowly, with subtle gestures and quiet conversations that seemed ordinary but carried enormous meaning. Samuel observed everything: how I spoke, how I looked at Amelia, how I responded to questions about my life. I tried to remain composed, telling myself that love was enough, that my heart and intentions mattered more than my bank account or social status. And yet, beneath the surface of polite conversation, I sensed a tension I could not name. A question lingered in Samuel's mind, one that would decide whether our love could survive his scrutiny. I didn't know it yet, but everything the years of struggle, the small victories, the moments of doubt was leading up to that single, defining moment. Amelia and I had shared so many little things in our relationship. Late-night walks, laughter over burnt dinners, quiet mornings when the world felt paused just for us. But all of that seemed fragile in the presence of Samuel's gaze. I realized that love, as beautiful as it was, could be fragile when measured against someone's power, someone's judgment, someone's world entirely unlike your own. By the end of that day, as I stood in the grand hallway of his mansion, I felt a mix of awe, fear, and hope. I knew that whatever happened next, the question, the answer, the decision would shape not only my relationship with Amelia, but also my understanding of love, trust, and the boundaries between two very different worlds. After that day at Samuel's mansion, life didn't return to the same simplicity it once had. Something subtle had shifted. An unspoken weight hung over our relationship. I could sense it in Amelia's quiet moments, the way she would pause before answering questions about her family or her future. And I could feel it in myself, too, a creeping awareness that love alone might not be enough to bridge the worlds we came from. At first, it was small things. Amelia would check her phone more often, eyes darting to messages that I didn't understand. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself that she had responsibilities I could never fully comprehend. But the tension grew slowly, like shadows stretching across a room in the late afternoon. Every smile felt slightly forced, every laugh a little too controlled. Then came the subtle reminders of our differences. Dinner with her friends, lavish gatherings I couldn't afford to attend without feeling like an outsider. Their conversations about investments, yachts, and properties made me feel invisible in a way I had never known before. Amelia noticed my discomfort, and she tried to reassure me. "James, it's okay," she would say, placing her hand over mine. "You belong here too." Her words were kind, but they couldn't erase the knowing feeling that maybe, just maybe, I didn't. Samuel's presence lingered over all of this. He didn't say much, not directly, but I could feel his judgment in the way he watched us, the way his eyes would flicker to mine, silently measuring. I respected him, no, I feared him, though I tried not to let it show. And I wondered if he had planted the seeds of this unease, carefully observing, testing, waiting to see if love could withstand the invisible barriers he had built around his daughter. Then came the day he asked me to accompany Amelia to one of his charity events. I felt out of place in my simple suit among men in tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that seemed almost unreal. I tried to focus on Amelia, who smiled at me warmly, but I could sense her own tension. Samuel was there, of course, observing quietly. His presence a subtle reminder that we were being measured against expectations I didn't even fully understand. During the event, a conversation changed everything. Amelia mentioned her plans for the future, her desire to combine philanthropy with business, and her vision for a life built on purpose and wealth. I nodded along, genuinely impressed, but a pang of fear struck me. Would I ever fit into that world? Would she grow distant as our paths diverged, drawn by a life I couldn't offer? The days after that event were harder than I expected. I tried to speak openly with Amelia, but she seemed preoccupied, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share. I could feel the distance growing, not through arguments or fights, but through silences and half-smiles. I began to question myself. Was I enough? Could love survive the invisible walls built by wealth and expectation? It was during one of these quiet evenings that Samuel finally spoke directly to me. We were alone in the study of his mansion, the room filled with the faint scent of leather-bound books and polished wood. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and said simply, "James, do you truly understand the responsibility of loving Amelia? She comes from a world unlike yours. Her life will be scrutinized, judged, and challenged in ways you may never face. Can you withstand that?" His words were calm, but the weight behind them pressed down on me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. I love her, I said quietly. I don't care about money or status. I care about her, her happiness, and being with her. Samuel studied me for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. But I could tell it wasn't enough for him. He was testing me silently, watching how I would react, measuring the strength of my love against the expectations of a world I didn't belong to. Back home, Amelia was quiet that night. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but her eyes were soft, distant, like she was holding something inside. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. James, sometimes I wonder if we're in over our heads. Her words struck me like a cold wind. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that we were strong enough, that love could survive anything, but the doubt had begun to creep into my own heart. I realized that it wasn't just Samuel's tests or Amelia's worries, it was the subtle fear that we were different in ways that money could never measure, differences that threatened to pull us apart. And then the rumors started. Small whispers from friends, family, even strangers who seemed to know Samuel's world better than I did. Some said Amelia might be considering someone else, someone with wealth and status that matched her own. I tried to dismiss it, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. I began noticing her small hesitations, her fleeting glances when talking to others, the way she would sometimes avoid my eyes when discussing her father's expectations. I didn't want to believe it, but a quiet fear took hold. I wondered if I had been naive to think that love alone could bridge the gap between us. Every gesture, every word, every pause became a potential clue, a hint that something was shifting beneath the surface. One evening, I followed my instincts and asked her directly, Amelia, is there something you're not telling me? She looked at me, her eyes soft but unreadable. James, you know I care about you. I always will, but my life, my family, it's complicated. I can't always be who I want to be with you, not if it means disappointing my father, not if it means losing everything he's built. Her words, gentle as they were, cut deeper than any harsh confrontation could have. I felt the growing distance between us, the invisible barrier built by expectations, wealth, and fear. I realized that love alone was not enough, not when pride, family, and ambition intertwined to create obstacles I could not see, let alone overcome. Days turned into weeks, and the tension became almost unbearable. Every meeting with Samuel felt like a test, every conversation with Amelia a delicate negotiation. I tried to hold on to hope, to remind myself that our love had started in simplicity, in honesty, in connection that had nothing to do with money or status. But the world Samuel had built, and the expectations he carried, threatened to engulf everything we had. And then came the day that changed everything. A single, quiet moment, a simple question, asked by Samuel with calm precision, that would reveal not just the truth about Amelia's heart, but about the choices, sacrifices, and courage that define real love. I didn't know it then, but that question would mark the turning point of our story. The moment when fear and doubt would collide with honesty and trust, forever reshaping the lives of all three of us. The day of the turning point arrived quietly, almost unassumingly. I remember waking up that morning with a strange sense of inevitability, a feeling that today would change everything. Amelia seemed calm, almost too calm, as she prepared for her meeting with her father. I watched her from the doorway, the soft light of dawn catching in her hair, and felt a lump in my throat. How could one simple question determine the fate of our love? Samuel had invited me to sit in on the conversation, though I sensed I was more observer than participant. The room was grand, yet not ostentatious polished wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight filtering in, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. Amelia sat across from her father, her posture perfect, hands folded gently on her lap. I could feel the tension in the space between them. A quiet current that carried years of expectation, pride, and careful calculation. Samuel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes steady and penetrating. He looked at Amelia, then at me, then back at her. And then, in a voice calm yet commanding, he asked the question that would forever alter the course of our lives. Amelia, if love were tested by hardship, humility, and sacrifice, would you still choose him? It was simple. Almost deceptively simple. But the weight behind it was immense. Every word held the judgment of a lifetime. every pause the scrutiny of someone who had built an empire not just with money, but with vision, discipline, and expectation. I felt my heart thud in my chest, my palms growing slightly damp. This question was not about wealth or status, it was about character, courage, and the truth of the heart. Amelia's eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I might not hear her answer clearly, but she drew a slow, deliberate breath and spoke, her voice soft, unwavering, and honest. Yes. That one word hung in the air, gentle yet thunderous. Yes, she repeated, as if reinforcing the depth of her conviction. I would choose him, not for his wealth, not for what he can give me, but because I love him, because he makes me feel whole, because what we have is real, and that is worth everything. I felt a surge of relief, a wave of gratitude, so overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. But I also felt something else quiet. Samuel's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, but there was no mistaking the pride in his eyes. He had tested her, yes, but in truth, I think he had been waiting to see if love could withstand the pressure of expectations, the temptation of convenience, the pull of a world so unlike ours. And Amelia had passed. The moment was not just about her answer. It was about the unspoken understanding that love, when rooted in sincerity and courage, transcends all barriers. Samuel leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but warm. You have proven something today, Amelia, not just to me, but to yourself and to the world. Love is not about comfort or ease, it is about choice, integrity, and loyalty. I see that in you. I could hardly speak. I wanted to tell him how grateful I was, how much I loved Amelia, how I had feared I might lose her, but words failed me. Instead, I simply took her hand gently, letting our fingers intertwine. She squeezed back, a silent affirmation that we had survived the unspoken trials, that we were stronger for having faced them together. But the turning point was not only in the answer, it was in the subtle revelations that followed. Samuel shared memories of Amelia's childhood, stories of her own challenges, and moments where her heart had been tested long before we met. He spoke of the sacrifices he had made to build his empire, and the lessons he had learned about the fragility of wealth without love. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls of intimidation and doubt that had hung over me began to dissolve. For the first time, I saw Samuel not as an obstacle, but as a guardian of values of love, honesty, and integrity. And I realized that Amelia's answer had not just changed her father's mind, it had changed mine as well. I no longer felt like an outsider, inadequate or unworthy. I felt like a partner, equal in the strength of heart and conviction, capable of standing alongside the woman I loved in a world that often measured worth by wealth alone. Amelia's gaze met mine again, softer this time, a quiet understanding passing between us. In that look, I felt forgiveness for my earlier doubts, reassurance for my insecurities, and a shared joy in the knowledge that we had endured a test of a kind far greater than anything either of us had imagined. Samuel rose from his chair then, and I noticed the faintest trace of a smile, a rare, almost imperceptible expression that spoke volumes. He walked over, placed a firm yet gentle hand on my shoulder, and said simply, "James, you love my daughter." That is all I needed to know. The simplicity of those words was astonishing. After all the tension, the unspoken scrutiny, the subtle fear that had haunted me, it all came down to one undeniable truth. Love mattered more than wealth, more than appearances, more than fear. And Amelia had proven that she understood this truth better than anyone I had ever met. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. The invisible barriers between our worlds began to dissolve, not immediately, but gradually. Samuel included me in discussions, asked for my opinions, treated me as someone worthy, not because of what I had, and Amelia, she became more radiant than ever, not because of her father's approval, but because we had survived the moment that could have broken us. Looking back, I realized that the turning point was not just Amelia's answer. It was the courage it took to answer honestly, the integrity behind every word, and the willingness to face the possibility of loss for the sake of truth. It was the moment when love revealed its true power not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in quiet conviction, in the calm strength of saying, "I choose this, and I choose it fully, without hesitation." That moment changed everything. It gave me hope, it gave Amelia freedom, and it gave Samuel reassurance that the heart could never be measured by money or social standing. We learned in that quiet room filled with sunlight and subtle tension that love is a test in itself, test of patience, courage, humility, and loyalty. And when that test is passed, it creates bonds far stronger than anything wealth can buy.